My sister hid my passport the night before my flight and said maybe it grew legs and walked away. When I confronted her the next morning, she smiled and said, "You're being dramatic. You're just disorganized." I just stared at her. That was 8 months ago. Yesterday, she stood in court, hands cuffed, face white. My sister hid my passport right before my flight, so I used her own trick against her. Now, her trip is ruined. If there's one thing you should know about my sister, it's that she lives for chaos. Not the big dramatic movie-style kind. No, she's a petty chaos kind of person. The type who'll eat the last slice of cake even though she knows you've been saving it, then act like she's doing you a favor by helping you cut sugar. In high school, she borrowed my prom shoes without telling me, and returned them covered in mud because she'd worn them to a party in someone's backyard. Her excuse? Well, you didn't tell me not to wear them in the grass. So when I say she has a history of sabotaging me, I'm not exaggerating. It's her hobby. Last year, I finally booked my dream trip, 2 weeks in Italy. I'd been saving for 2 years, working extra hours, skipping nights out, the whole thing. This was going to be my first big solo trip abroad, and I was ridiculously excited. I had everything planned. Flights, hotels, tours, even dinner reservations at this little place in Florence I'd read about online. Of course, my sister knew about the trip. She didn't seem happy for me, more like vaguely irritated that I had something cool going on that didn't involve her. She made little comments in the weeks leading up to it. "Hope you like pasta, because that's all you'll be able to afford. Just don't get scammed by pickpockets. You scream tourist. You're really going alone? Wow, bold choice. You know, supportive sibling stuff." The night before my flight, I was doing a final checklist before bed. Clothes? Packed. Chargers? Packed. Passport? The passport was not where it always is, in a little zippered pouch in my desk drawer. I checked the drawer again, and again, and again. It wasn't there. Cue full-blown panic. I tore through my apartment like a raccoon in a dumpster. Every bag, every jacket pocket, every weird kitchen drawer, nothing. I was sweating, my heart was pounding, and I kept checking the clock because my flight was in less than 12 hours. And then I remembered. My sister had stopped by 2 days earlier. She'd borrowed my winter boots for some costume thing she was doing. And the desk drawer with my passport, right next to where those boots were stored. I called her. "Hey, weird question. Did you happen to see my passport?" Pause, long enough to be suspicious. "Why would I have your passport?" "I don't know. Maybe because you were here 2 days ago?" She let out this fake laugh. "Wow, paranoid much? Maybe you just misplaced it." I gritted my teeth. "I keep it in the same place every time. It's not there." "Well," she said sweetly, "maybe it grew legs and walked away." I wanted to scream, but I hung up and kept searching. Finally, after midnight, I found it, shoved in a shoebox at the very back of my closet under the winter boots she had borrowed. I didn't put it there. When I confronted her the next day, she stuck to her story. "You're being dramatic. I didn't hide your passport. You're just disorganized." Then she smiled like she'd just won something. I went to Italy, but the whole time I kept thinking about how she'd tried to ruin the trip for, what, a laugh? Control? It wasn't the first time she'd done something like this, but I decided it was going to be the last. Fast forward a few months. She's bragging nonstop about her upcoming trip to Cancun with her friends. You could not have a 5-minute conversation with her without hearing about it. New swimsuits, spray tan appointment. I'm going to post so many pictures on Instagram, people will be jealous. The works. And then, opportunity knocked. One afternoon, she asked me to help her with her online booking because she was having trouble logging into her airline account. While she was in the bathroom, she left her passport sitting right there on the coffee table along with all her travel documents. Now, I'm not saying the universe wanted me to take revenge, but the universe wasn't not saying it either. I casually picked up her passport and wrote down the number and all the identifying details. Then a week later, I called the passport office and reported it as lost. With those details, it was easy. They immediately canceled it in their system. Fast forward to the morning of her trip. I'm at home sipping coffee when my phone rings. It's her. She's at the airport, voice pitched at full panic. "They won't let me board. They say my passport is invalid. Did you do this?" I let her rant for a good 30 seconds before I answered. "Wow, paranoid much? Maybe it grew legs." She screamed something I can't repeat and hung up. Later, I found out she lost almost everything she'd paid for. Flights, hotel, excursions, all non-refundable. She spent the week sulking at home while her friends went without her. I thought that was the end of it. But 3 nights later at 2 a.m., I woke up to someone pounding on my apartment door so hard the walls shook. Through the peephole, I saw Jessica, face red and twisted with rage, screaming about how I ruined her life. I grabbed my phone and started recording as she yelled that I had no idea what she was capable of. She kicked the door twice before finally storming off. I saved the video and tried to go back to sleep but kept jumping at every little noise. The next morning, I headed down to the parking garage and found all 4 of my tires slashed, rubber hanging in strips. The security guard said the cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during that exact time window. The cop who came out barely looked at the damage before suggesting it was probably just random vandalism. I had to call in late to work while waiting for the tow truck. By day 3, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone when I called David from the office bathroom. He heard the panic in my voice and immediately said he'd come stay with me for a few days. I felt guilty dragging him into this mess, but also relieved I wouldn't be alone. The next morning, my work inbox exploded with hundreds of emails from random people responding to Craigslist ads for free electronics and furniture that Jessica had posted using my contact info. My boss pulled me into his office asking why I was conducting personal business on company time. One of the emails wasn't even about furniture, just a single line saying I should watch my back. 2 days later, my mom called, upset about what she called this silly fight between us girls. She insisted I apologize and be the bigger person since Jessica was devastated about missing her trip. When I tried explaining about my slashed tires, she just said that was probably a coincidence. That evening, David came over with his laptop and helped me change every single password and set up 2-factor authentication on everything. We ordered Thai food and tried to watch a movie, but I kept checking the door locks and flinching every time my phone buzzed. The following week, I walked into work to find 2 people from HR waiting at my desk. Someone had sent an anonymous tip claiming I'd been stealing office supplies and selling them online, complete with obviously fake photoshopped receipts. They said they had to investigate even though the evidence looked suspicious. My friend Sophia came over that night with wine and her laptop to help me organize everything into a timeline. We uploaded the 2 a.m. video, the police report, screenshots of all the work emails, and the HR complaint to a secure cloud folder. She mentioned she'd never liked Jessica anyway. By day 10, I couldn't take it anymore and broke down crying in my car during lunch. I called in sick and drove to the park by the lake, sitting on a bench trying to understand how my own sister could hate me this much over a stupid passport prank. That's when my phone started going crazy with texts and calls from random men. Jessica had made a fake dating profile with my real photos, phone number, and worst of all, my actual address. 3 different guys showed up at my apartment building that night asking for me by name. David was furious when I told him what was happening and immediately grabbed his phone to text Jessica. He typed out a message telling her to stop this crazy behavior right now. Within minutes, she responded with screenshots of private texts between David and me from months ago. Somehow she had access to my old phone backups from when we shared a family cloud account. She threatened to share more interesting things if he didn't mind his own business. David's face face went white as he scrolled through what she'd sent him. The next week, we went to see a lawyer about getting a restraining order against Jessica. The lawyer looked through all our evidence and shook his head. He explained that everything we had was circumstantial, and we needed more concrete proof linking Jessica directly to the harassment. The retainer fee alone would be $3,000, money I didn't have after spending my savings on Italy. We left the office feeling defeated and more scared than before. That's when my dad Robert finally called me after my mom Linda filled him in on what was happening. He sounded sympathetic but kept saying Jessica was just hurt about missing her Cancun trip. He suggested we all have a family dinner to work things out like adults. I didn't want to go, but hoped maybe he could reason with Jessica since she'd always been daddy's little girl. The dinner was set for the following Friday at our usual Italian place downtown. Jessica showed up 20 minutes late and immediately started playing victim about how I'd ruined her vacation. When I tried to bring up the fake dating profile and the harassment, she gasped dramatically. She told everyone I was paranoid and delusional and suggested I needed therapy for my issues. My mom was nodding along while my dad just stared at his plate saying nothing at all. I couldn't take it anymore and stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. There's something strange about how easily she got Jessica's passport details while helping with the airline account. Makes me wonder if Jessica set up that whole situation on purpose, knowing exactly what would happen. I grabbed my purse and walked out while Jessica called after me that I was proving her point about being unstable. In the parking lot, my dad caught up with me and pulled me into a quick hug. He pressed $500 cash into my hand and whispered it was for new tires. Then he said he couldn't openly take sides because I knew how my mother got about family unity. That's when it really hit me that I was basically alone in dealing with my sister's vendetta. A few days later, I got a Facebook message from Nathan, Jessica's ex-boyfriend from 2 years ago. He'd seen the fake dating profile and recognized the pattern immediately from his own experience. We met for coffee, and he told me Jessica had done similar things when he broke up with her. She'd filed false police reports saying he was stalking her and had tried to get him fired from his job. He'd kept documentation of everything but never pursued legal action because he just wanted to move on. He gave me copies of all his evidence, which at least made me feel less crazy about everything. The stress was getting to me so badly that I finally made an appointment with a therapist. She validated everything I was feeling and helped me recognize that this was targeted harassment, not me being paranoid. We talked about safety planning and coping strategies for dealing with ongoing abuse. The quiet dread settled in when she gently explained that without legal intervention, this could go on indefinitely. Then my credit card got maxed out with mysterious charges from online stores I'd never heard of. Jessica had used saved payment information from our old shared Netflix account to access my card details. The fraud department froze my account immediately, but that meant I couldn't pay rent without access to my money. The financial pressure was mounting on top of everything else she was doing to destroy my life. My friend Sophia called me frantically one afternoon saying she'd just seen Jessica at a coffee shop. Sophia had discreetly recorded Jessica bragging to a friend about teaching me a lesson. In the video, Jessica was laughing about how I had no idea what was coming next. Then she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. She still had a spare key to my apartment. I raced home that day with my heart pounding in my chest the entire drive. My apartment door was unlocked even though I distinctly remembered locking it that morning. Nothing was stolen, but everything felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Photos were turned backward on the shelves and my clothes were rearranged in the closet. Food in the fridge had been moved to different shelves than where I'd put them. The violation of my safe space broke something inside me that I didn't know could break. David insisted I couldn't stay there alone anymore and started packing a bag for me to stay at his place. I grabbed only the basics while he loaded my laptop and work clothes into his car, my hands shaking as I stuffed toiletries into a grocery bag. The drive to his place took 20 minutes but felt like hours. Every car behind us looking suspicious, every red light making my chest tight. His apartment was smaller than mine, just a one-bedroom in an older building, and I kept apologizing as we carried my stuff up the stairs. He set my bags down in his bedroom and pulled me close, telling me this wasn't my fault, but I could see the worry lines around his eyes getting deeper. That first week living with him, I tried to take up as little space as possible, keeping my clothes in one corner of his closet, working from his kitchen table with headphones on so I wouldn't disturb him. My mom started calling on day 3, leaving voicemail after voicemail about how I was destroying the family and breaking my dad's heart by causing all this drama. The 5th message was different though. She mentioned something about my apartment being broken into before I'd told anyone except David and the police, which meant Jessica had already been talking to her. I saved all the messages and added them to the growing folder of evidence on my laptop. Sophia came over that weekend with her laptop and a bottle of wine, and we spent 4 hours researching stalking laws in our state while David made dinner. The laws were stricter than they used to be, covering digital harassment and cyber stalking, but the burden of proof was still high. We'd need to show a clear pattern of behavior that caused substantial emotional distress. We started organizing everything chronologically: screenshots, emails, the break-in report, the workplace complaints, building a timeline that showed the escalation. Monday morning at work, HR called me in to discuss their investigation findings from the previous weeks. They'd cleared me of any wrongdoing, but the whole report mentioned the disruption to workplace productivity multiple times, and my boss pulled me aside afterward to suggest maybe I should get my personal life sorted before it affected my performance reviews. I sat in my car during lunch trying not to cry, realizing Jessica was successfully cutting me off from every support system I had. 3 days later, I filed my 3rd police report about the ongoing harassment, and this time they assigned a detective named Brooks who actually seemed to care. She looked through my evidence folder for 40 minutes, taking notes and asking specific questions about dates and times. She recognized the escalation pattern immediately and suggested I vary my daily routines, maybe install security cameras, but warned me that without Jessica making direct threats or getting caught in the act, prosecution would be nearly impossible. That same week, I discovered Jessica had been messaging my coworkers on LinkedIn. Nothing overtly malicious, just subtle suggestions that I was going through something difficult and might be struggling with stress. 2 people from my team awkwardly asked if I was okay during coffee breaks, their eyes full of that careful concern people have when they think you might snap. David found me at 3 a.m. sitting on his bathroom floor, my whole body shaking from a panic attack about having to go to work and face everyone. He called us both in sick and spent the entire day helping me practice normal responses to people's questions, coaching me through basic workplace interactions like I was preparing for a job interview. I felt pathetic needing to rehearse how to act normal at my own job. Nathan, Jessica's ex, reached out through Facebook saying he'd heard what was happening and wanted to help. We met at a coffee shop where he handed me a flash drive with 2 years worth of messages and emails from when Jessica had stalked him after their breakup. The patterns were identical: the fake social media accounts, the workplace harassment, the gradual isolation from friends and family, even down to similar wording in the messages. He warned me that with him it had escalated to her following him physically, showing up at his gym, his grocery store, even outside his new girlfriend's apartment. Detective Brooks added Nathan's evidence to my case file, noting it established a clear pattern of behavior, though she still needed more for criminal charges. charges. My therapist started documenting the physical symptoms of stress I was experiencing, the insomnia that had me awake until 4 most nights, the 12 pounds I'd lost without trying, the anxiety attacks that hit randomly during the day. She said this medical documentation could be important if we ever got to court. Proof of the substantial emotional distress the law required. Friday afternoon, David texted me from work saying I needed to come to his office immediately. When I arrived, his supervisor was there with a package that had been delivered to David's desk, addressed to him, but about me. Inside were printed screenshots of my therapy appointment confirmations, medical records I didn't even know Jessica had access to, and a typed note saying, "Your girlfriend is certifiably crazy, thought you should know the truth before it's too late." His supervisor had to document the incident for their security team, and I could see David's jaw clenching as he told them he'd handle it. That night, David set up extra locks on his apartment door while I watched from the couch, my hands still shaking from seeing those medical records Jessica had somehow gotten. The next week, Robert texted me asking to meet for lunch at this little sandwich place downtown, saying he needed to talk without Linda knowing. I showed up early and found him already there in a back booth, looking older than I'd ever seen him. He pushed a coffee toward me and said Jessica had always been difficult, but Linda refused to see it, then pulled out his checkbook and wrote me a check for $5,000. He told me to use it for a lawyer because this had gone too far, but I couldn't tell Linda he was helping me. I took the check even though it made my stomach hurt thinking about how this was splitting my family apart. That Saturday I tried to feel normal while David was at work, deciding to cook dinner as a surprise, but I couldn't focus and the smoke alarm went off when the chicken burned black in the oven. I sat on the kitchen floor crying because I couldn't even do simple things anymore without my mind racing about what Jessica might do next. The lawyer Robert's money paid for filed the restraining order paperwork on day 50, using all the evidence the detective had helped me gather, and said the court date was set for 3 weeks out. Jessica would get served the papers within 48 hours, and the lawyer warned me to be ready for her reaction. 2 days later, my phone started ringing nonstop, and when I finally answered, it was Linda screaming that I was ruining Jessica's reputation and destroying the family by getting lawyers involved. She said if I didn't drop the case immediately, then I wasn't her daughter anymore, and hung up before I could respond. $5,000 from Robert in a parking lot sandwich shop feels like a spy movie, except instead of state secrets, it's just one dad who finally gets that his daughter needs actual help against her sister's reign of terror. Robert texted me right after just saying to stay strong and that he loved me no matter what. Sophia organized a small get-together the next week with just her, me, David, and 2 friends from college, ordering pizza and playing board games without mentioning Jessica once. For 3 hours, I actually laughed and felt like myself again, until my phone rang with a call from my apartment building manager. He said several neighbors had been complaining about strange men knocking on my door at all hours asking for services, and someone had posted escort ads online with my apartment number. He warned me about lease violations if it continued, and I had to explain about the harassment case while my hands shook. The detective interviewed Nathan officially on day 55 at the police station, taking his statement about Jessica's past behavior with other people she'd targeted. She mentioned she was building a criminal harassment case but needed the restraining order hearing to happen first, and Nathan agreed to testify if needed. I tried going back to my apartment to get more clothes, but when I got to the parking garage where my tires had been slashed, I couldn't breathe, and my chest got so tight I thought I was having a heart attack. David had to leave work to come get me after I called him crying from my locked car, unable to stop shaking. He found me curled up in the driver's seat and had to basically carry me to his car, while I kept saying Jessica had taken everything from me. Linda showed up at David's apartment the next week without warning, begging me to drop the restraining order because Jessica was supposedly suicidal over the legal action. I was so tired I could barely stand, but I told her Jessica needed professional help, not people making excuses for her. Linda left crying and calling me heartless while I stood in the doorway feeling completely empty. David and I started changing everything about our routines, taking different routes to work, shopping at different stores, going to the gym at random times. He installed security apps on both our phones that would track our locations and alert each other if something seemed wrong. Every single day felt like walking through a minefield, never knowing what Jessica would do next or when this nightmare would end. Day 62 arrived with a kind of stomach-churning dread that makes you want to call in sick to your own life. The courthouse steps seemed endless as I climbed them with David beside me, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the folder of evidence we'd compiled over the past weeks. Inside the hearing room, Jessica sat at the other table with a lawyer in an expensive suit that screamed Linda's money, her face arranged in this perfect mask of wounded innocence that made my skin crawl. She'd even worn a conservative dress and minimal makeup, playing the victim to perfection. Her lawyer started by painting me as the aggressor, describing the passport incident as a vindictive attack on an innocent woman who simply wanted to enjoy a vacation with friends. Jessica took a stand and spoke in this soft, trembling voice about how I'd always been jealous of her success, how the Cancun incident had ruined her reputation at work, how she was now seeing a therapist for the trauma I'd caused. The judge, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, kept glancing between us with this expression that said she'd seen too many family feuds to be impressed by either side. Nathan took the stand next, and even though Jessica's lawyer tried to make him look like a bitter ex with an axe to grind, he stayed calm and presented screenshots of hundreds of texts Jessica had sent him after their breakup, including threats to ruin his career if he dated anyone else. The detective testified about the pattern of escalation she'd documented, from the initial harassment to the break-ins to the workplace incidents, laying out a timeline that showed Jessica's behavior getting progressively worse. Jessica's lawyer kept objecting, claiming the evidence was circumstantial, that anyone could have done these things, that there was no direct proof Jessica was responsible. After 3 hours of testimony and arguments, the judge said she'd take it under advisement, and we'd have a decision within 72 hours. Walking out to my car afterward, I felt completely hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides and left just the shell. Even with all our evidence, all our witnesses, Jessica had somehow made it seem like we were equally at fault, like this was just 2 sisters who couldn't get along rather than one systematically destroying the other's life. David found me sitting in the driver's seat, staring at nothing, and reminded me that bullies like Jessica don't stop when you try to appease them. They just see it as weakness and push harder. 3 days later, the call came while I was at work trying to focus on spreadsheets that kept blurring together. The judge had granted a temporary restraining order for 90 days. Jessica had to stay 500 feet away from me and cease all contact, direct or indirect. Relief flooded through me so fast I had to sit down, but underneath it was this cold fear because I knew Jessica, and being told no by an authority figure was like waving a red flag at a bull. Sure enough, less than 24 hours after the order was issued, I woke up to dozens of notifications on my phone. My Instagram had been hacked overnight and filled with disturbing posts about mental illness, substance abuse, and violent fantasies, all written as if I'd posted them myself. By the time I managed to regain control of the account, the damage was done, friends and coworkers had seen the posts, screenshots were circulating, and my professional reputation took another hit. The posts had been made from a VPN, making them impossible to trace. And technically, Jessica wasn't violating the restraining order since she wasn't contacting me directly. The therapist I'd started seeing twice a week noted that I was showing signs of complex PTSD. My hands shook constantly. I jumped at every unexpected sound, and I developed this habit of checking locks obsessively. She wanted to discuss medication for the anxiety, but I refused because I couldn't shake the feeling that taking meds would prove Jessica right about me being crazy. Sophia called me the next week, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. She'd noticed someone following her after she left my old apartment building where she'd gone to pick up a package that got misdelivered. She'd managed to lose them by ducking into a busy store and slipping out the back, but she'd gotten a partial license plate before they drove off. The detective ran it and found it was a rental car paid for with a prepaid credit card, another dead end in a case full of them. That same day, Robert showed up at David's apartment while I was at work, carrying bags of groceries and an envelope with a check for $5,000. David told me later that Robert had broken down, admitting that Jessica had been like this since childhood, that she'd tormented kids at school, destroyed friendships, sabotaged other people's relationships. But Linda had always made excuses, always bailed her out, always blamed the victims for provoking her. He said he'd stayed silent too long, enabled it by not standing up to Linda, and now he was watching his younger daughter's life get destroyed by the monster they'd created. A week later, my boss called me into his office with a grim expression. Someone had filed an anonymous OSHA complaint specifically about safety violations in my department, claiming exposed wires, improper chemical storage, and inadequate emergency exits. The inspection that followed shut down our entire floor for 3 days while they investigated every single claim, all of which turned out to be false or grossly exaggerated. My boss, who'd been incredibly understanding up until now, told me that while he sympathized with my situation, the disruptions were affecting the entire company, and his patience was wearing thin. The detective called that afternoon with what should have been good news. She'd compiled enough evidence to file criminal harassment charges against Jessica. The prosecutor was willing to move forward, but warned that it could take months to get to trial, and Jessica would almost certainly make bail, meaning she'd be free to continue her campaign while we waited for a court date. I had to decide whether to proceed, knowing it might escalate things even further, or let it go and hope Jessica would eventually get bored and move on, though everything in her history suggested she never got bored of tormenting people. I decided to press charges. David spent the next week driving me around different neighborhoods, looking at apartments that were at least 20 miles from where Jessica knew I lived. We checked out 12 places in 5 days, each one either too expensive or too sketchy, or already rented by the time we called back. The breaking lease fee was $2,000 plus losing my security deposit, and every new place wanted first month, last month, and another deposit. David kept pulling up his banking app, doing the math, shaking his head, then saying we'd figure it out somehow. On week 12, we finally found a 2-bedroom in a quiet complex near the highway, and the landlord said she could hold it for 3 days while we got the money together. That same night, Linda sent me an email with a video attachment. The subject line said, "Please watch this." Jessica was sitting on Linda's couch, makeup running down her face, sobbing about how sorry she was, how she was getting therapy now, how she never meant for things to go this far. I'd seen this exact performance when we were kids, like when she got caught stealing money from mom's purse, or when she scratched dad's car with her bike and tried to blame the neighbor. She'd cry until her face got all red and puffy, promise to change, then go right back to whatever she was doing before. Robert showing up with groceries and $5,000 makes me wonder if he's been quietly saving this money for a while, knowing this day would come. Jessica hiring an expensive lawyer while her father secretly helps the victim tells me this family has some deep, unspoken divisions happening right now. I saved the video to my evidence folder and didn't respond. 3 days later, on day 84, the police showed up at Jessica's apartment with an arrest warrant. Linda paid the $10,000 bail that afternoon, and Jessica was out by dinner time. The judge set conditions though: no contact with me, stay 500 feet away, surrender her passport, and the trial date got scheduled for 4 months out. I went back to work full-time the next Monday, trying to act normal while everyone gave me these weird looks. My coworkers would ask if I was okay, then quickly change the subject to work stuff. Nobody sat with me at lunch anymore. I ate my sandwich alone in the break room, scrolling through apartment listings and wondering if my career would ever recover from all this drama. Week 13, flowers started showing up at my desk. The first bouquet came Tuesday morning with a card that said, "Thinking of you, no signature." Wednesday brought roses with "Sorry for everything" written in block letters. Thursday was lilies with "Miss you." Security checked the cameras, and it was just different delivery drivers each time, all paid in cash at different flower shops around town. The restraining order said Jessica couldn't contact me, but technically she wasn't. The flowers were. My boss started giving me looks every time another delivery showed up. On day 91, Sophia posted this long thing on Facebook about stalking and harassment, never mentioning Jessica's name, but describing situations that were obviously about her. Within hours, it had 300 shares and dozens of comments. My phone started buzzing with messages from people I hadn't talked to in years. Jessica's old coworker from the bookstore said she'd done similar stuff there, following a manager home after getting written up. A girl from their high school said Jessica had spread rumors about her for 2 years after some petty argument. Even Mrs. Ruiz, our 10th grade English teacher, messaged to say Jessica had sent her anonymous hate mail after getting a B on an essay. David and I signed the lease on the new apartment that weekend. The property manager took one look at the restraining order paperwork and said she understood, waiving the credit check if we could pay an extra month up front. We emptied our savings accounts, borrowed from David's parents, and maxed out my credit card, but we got the keys. Packing took 2 weeks. I kept finding stuff that reminded me of better times, before everything went crazy. In a box of old books, I found our childhood photo albums. There we were at the beach, Jessica pushing me on the swings, both of us covered in cake at my 6th birthday party, matching Halloween costumes when I was 8 and she was 10. I sat on my bedroom floor, looking at these pictures of 2 little girls who actually seemed to love each other, and wondered if that Jessica ever really existed, or if I'd just been too young to see what she really was. The detective called while I was taping up the last box. They'd traced some of the harassment posts to a coffee shop on 3rd Street, and the security footage showed Jessica there during the exact times the posts went up. She was literally sitting there with her laptop, typing away while sipping a latte, posting horrible things about me online. It was circumstantial, but it helped establish a pattern, and the prosecutor felt better about our chances at trial. Moving day came on day 98. David rented a truck and his brother came to help load boxes. We were carrying stuff down when I saw her standing across the street, exactly 501 feet away, according to the measuring app on her phone that she was holding up. Jessica just stood there, taking pictures with her other hand, watching us load our entire life into a truck because of her. David called the cops, but they said she wasn't breaking the restraining order. 500 feet meant 500 feet, and she was at 501. The movers kept loading boxes while she kept taking pictures, and I could feel my hands shaking as I carried another lamp to the truck. David squeezed my shoulder and went back inside for more stuff, but I couldn't stop watching her standing there with that small smile on her face. The whole move took 3 hours hours, and she stayed the entire time, sometimes walking up and down the sidewalk, but always staying exactly at that distance. When we finally pulled away in the moving truck, she waved at us like we were old friends saying goodbye. The new apartment was in a building with a doorman and security cameras everywhere, which made me feel a little better. I spent the first week installing extra locks on the door, motion sensors that would alert my phone if anyone came near, and I even got one of those doorbell cameras even though we were on the 8th floor. I changed my phone number and only gave it to David, my parents, my boss, and 2 close friends. The apartment was nice, bigger than our old place, but it felt empty even with all our stuff unpacked. I found myself checking the security camera app constantly, looking at the hallway outside our door, the lobby, the street entrance. David would catch me doing it and gently take my phone away, but 10 minutes later I'd be checking again. 2 weeks into the new place, I came home from work to find David holding an envelope with my name on it. The return address was my mom's house, but the handwriting wasn't hers. My stomach dropped as I opened it and saw Linda's neat cursive filling 3 pages. She wrote about how I'd destroyed their family, how Jessica was suffering because of my vindictiveness, how she couldn't believe I'd turned into such a cruel person. The worst part was the last line where she wrote that she only had 1 daughter now, and it wasn't me. I checked the postmark and realized it had been mailed 2 days after we moved, which meant Jessica had somehow gotten our new address and given it to her mom. The restraining order meant she couldn't come within 500 feet, but it didn't stop her from knowing exactly where we lived. My therapist had been pushing me to write a victim impact statement for the trial, saying it would help the judge understand what I'd been through. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, trying to find words for the past few months. Every time I started writing, my hand would cramp up or I'd start crying and have to stop. It took me 4 sessions over 2 weeks to get through the whole thing, reading it out loud while my therapist sat quietly and handed me tissues. The statement was 8 pages long when I finished, and practicing reading it made my voice shake every single time. I'd switched jobs quietly a month earlier, not even posting about it online, just showing up at a new company 40 minutes away from my old office. Everything was going fine until HR called me into a meeting on a Tuesday morning. They showed me an email they'd received from something called Premium Background Verification Services, asking detailed questions about my mental health history, any medications I might be taking, and whether I'd ever shown signs of instability at work. The email had typos, and the domain wasn't legitimate when IT checked it. My new boss was understanding when I explained the situation, but I could see the concern in her eyes. Nathan from the prosecutor's office called and said he wanted to introduce me to a support group for stalking victims that met every Thursday evening. I didn't want to go, but David convinced me it might help to talk to people who understood. The meeting was in a church basement, 8 people sitting in a circle on metal folding chairs. Everyone had a story, and they were all different but somehow the same. That feeling of being hunted, of never being safe. One woman named Carol had been dealing with her stalker for 3 years, and when she mentioned that hers had gotten worse after criminal charges were filed, everyone else nodded knowingly. My stomach felt like it was full of ice water as she described how her stalker had escalated from following to breaking into her car to eventually attempting to burn down her garage. That night, David made dinner, just pasta and salad, nothing fancy. We were eating quietly when he suddenly put down his fork and got down on one knee right there in our kitchen. He said he'd been carrying the ring for weeks, waiting for the right moment, but realized there might never be a perfect time, and he wanted me to know I wasn't alone in this fight. I started crying immediately. Not the happy tears you see in movies, but messy, complicated tears, because even this moment was tainted by everything happening. I said yes, but asked if we could wait until after the trial to plan anything, and he said he'd wait as long as I needed. 3 days later, my dad called at 2 in the morning to say he was at the hospital with my mom. My dad had chest pains and they were running tests. Nothing conclusive yet, but they wanted to keep him overnight. When I got there, Linda was already in the waiting room and the temperature dropped about 20 degrees when she saw me. She started immediately about how this was my fault, the stress I'd caused, how I should be ashamed of myself for what I'd done to the family. My mom tried to calm her down, but Linda just got louder until a nurse had to ask her to lower her voice. Jessica never showed up at all, and when someone asked where she was, Linda said she was too upset to come. Later, when I snuck into my dad's room, he was awake and hooked up to monitors. He took my hand and whispered that none of this was my fault, that he was proud of me for standing up for myself, but I still felt guilty. Sophia came over the next weekend with a box of hair dye and scissors, saying we were going to make me less recognizable when I was out in public. We spent the afternoon in my bathroom, her cutting my hair into a shorter style and adding highlights that changed my whole look. Jessica measuring exactly 501 feet with her phone while taking photos during the move is peak petty villain behavior, like a restraining order loophole lawyer who moonlights as a creepy photographer. She tried to make it fun, joking about witness protection makeovers and secret agent transformations, but we both knew why we were really doing it. When she left, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a stranger, which was exactly the point. The prosecutor called with news that made my blood run cold. They were offering Jessica a plea deal, 2 years probation, and mandatory therapy if she pleaded guilty to misdemeanor harassment instead of the felony stalking charges. Linda had been calling the prosecutor's office every day, crying about how jail would destroy her daughter, how Jessica just needed help, not punishment. The prosecutor said it was ultimately my decision whether to support the deal or push for trial. I told him I wanted the felony conviction, that she needed real consequences, and I could hear Linda's influence when he asked if I was sure I wanted to put the family through a trial. The detective called the next day with something interesting. They'd been investigating Jessica's activities and discovered she'd been using dating apps with fake photos to meet men, then convincing them to do favors for her. One guy had sent flowers to my old office. Another had called my previous employer asking questions. A third had been following David to work for a week before security noticed him. She never asked them directly to stalk us, just told sob stories about needing to check on her sick sister or wanting to surprise her brother-in-law. When the men found out they'd been used, 3 of them had already given statements to police. The detective said this pattern of using proxies showed sophistication and planning that would help prove the felony charges. Each man had screenshots of their conversations with Jessica, where she'd given them specific instructions while maintaining plausible deniability, always phrasing things as suggestions or concerns rather than direct requests. The prosecutor built the case piece by piece over the next few weeks while I tried to get back to some kind of normal life. Day Wonder 19 started out pretty good for once. I actually got through a whole presentation at work without checking my phone for bad news. Sophia took me to lunch at this little sandwich place near the office, and we talked about her wedding plans instead of my sister. That evening, David cooked dinner and we watched a movie on the couch like regular people do. For maybe 3 hours, I didn't think about Jessica at all. Then I felt this sick guilt wash over me for forgetting to stay alert. My therapist had a name for it when I told her the next day. She called it hypervigilance fatigue and said my brain needed those breaks even if they scared me. Week 18 brought the news that Jessica turned down the plea deal the prosecutor offered. Her lawyer filed motion after motion trying to get the case thrown out. They claimed I was the real aggressor and demanded all my therapy records from the past 5 years. They wanted my work files and performance reviews and even my college transcripts. The prosecutor fought most of it, but but some stuff the judge allowed. It felt like being stalked all over again, but through legal paperwork this time. Then Sophia's social media posts about what happened started getting shared everywhere. 3 women reached out saying Jessica had done similar things to them over the past 5 years. One had dated Jessica's ex and got anonymous death threats for months. Another worked at the same company and had to quit after Jessica spread rumors about her stealing. The third one's story was the worst, but the prosecutor said it showed clear escalation in Jessica's behavior. Jessica's lawyer fought hard to keep them from testifying, but the judge said he'd consider it. Day 126. David and I went to our first counseling session together. The counselor specialized in helping couples deal with trauma and its effects on relationships. We spent the whole hour working on communication strategies for the trial and whatever came after. She gave us these worksheets to fill out about our fears and expectations. David wrote that his biggest fear was not being able to protect me. Mine was that this would never really end. The judge ruled that 2 of the 3 women could testify about their experiences with Jessica. Her lawyer immediately asked for more time to prepare their defense against these new witnesses. The trial got pushed back another 2 months to late spring. I sat in the prosecutor's office when she told me and just stared at the calendar on her wall. Jessica was out there living her life while I was stuck in this endless waiting room. Week 19 brought a surprise when the prosecutor called to say my dad had given a deposition. He'd recovered from his heart problems enough to testify about Jessica's behavior growing up. The prosecutor showed me parts of the transcript later. He talked about finding dead birds in Jessica's room when she was 12. He described how she destroyed my science fair project the night before it was due. He admitted knowing she lied constantly, but never getting her help because my mom refused to believe anything was wrong. The transcript showed he broke down crying when he said he failed both of us. I had to go back to my old apartment to get some mail that was piling up. The super let me in, and the place felt wrong somehow. Everything was exactly where I'd left it, but it felt contaminated. I found a birthday card in the mail from 3 years ago that must have gotten lost. Jessica had written, "Love you forever, sis," inside with a little heart. I threw up in the kitchen sink. Day 133. The detective called with a warning that made my hands shake. Jessica had been researching flights to countries without extradition treaties. Her passport was supposedly turned in as part of her bail conditions, but she might have gotten a duplicate. They increased the check-ins to twice daily and added an ankle monitor. She posted photos of it on Instagram with crying emojis like she was the victim. My new coworkers invited me to happy hour the next Friday, and I made myself go. The bar was crowded and loud, and I kept checking every face that came through the door. Someone started telling a story about their crazy sister who kept borrowing money. Everyone laughed and shared their own family drama stories. I excused myself to the bathroom and sobbed in a stall for 10 minutes. When I came back, I made an excuse about not feeling well and left. Normal life felt like this impossible thing other people got to have. Week 20. Everything fell apart in a whole new way. My mom took a bunch of pills and left a note blaming me for destroying our family. The neighbor found her in time and called 911. She survived but had to stay in the psychiatric ward for evaluation. Jessica's lawyer filed an emergency motion the next day, claiming the prosecution was causing severe family trauma. The judge didn't dismiss the charges, but he made comments about the family dynamics being concerning. Jessica sat there in court with this tiny smile while her lawyer talked about our poor mother's suffering. 2 days later, I drove to the psychiatric ward where they were keeping my mom. The place smelled like bleach and sadness, and the walls were this awful beige color that made everything feel hopeless. Mom was sitting in a chair by the window when they brought me to her room, and she looked so small wrapped in that hospital gown. Her hands shook when she reached for mine, and for the first time ever, she actually said the words that Jessica has problems. She kept squeezing my hand and asking me to drop the charges, but I told her Jessica needed real consequences this time, not more protection. The nurse came in to give her medication, and I left feeling empty, but sure I was doing the right thing. 3 weeks passed with court dates and lawyer meetings, and then on day 140, David surprised me by suggesting we just get married at the courthouse. We'd been planning a real wedding before all this chaos, but he said he didn't want to wait anymore, and honestly, neither did I. That Thursday morning, we met Sophia and Nathan at the courthouse, and 20 minutes later, we were married. No white dress or fancy reception, just the 4 of us, and a judge who pronounced us husband and wife while my phone buzzed with messages from the prosecutor. We didn't tell anyone else because the trial was coming up and we didn't want Jessica finding out and using it against us somehow. Week 21 brought another meeting where the prosecutor laid out what she called the final plea offer. 5 years probation with a felony conviction plus mandatory therapy and a permanent restraining order keeping Jessica away from me and David. Jessica would avoid jail, but she'd have a criminal record forever, and any violation would mean immediate prison time. The prosecutor gave me the weekend to think about it, and I spent hours going back and forth because part of me wanted her in jail, but another part just wanted this to be over. My therapist helped me work through it during our session, and I realized I wanted Jessica to get help more than I wanted revenge. But I also knew from 28 years of experience that Jessica only changed when she faced real consequences, and even then it was temporary. The decision felt impossible because either way, I'd wonder if I made the right choice. I was still trying to decide when the prosecutor called on day 147 with news that made the choice for me. Jessica had rejected the plea deal completely, and her lawyer was going with a new strategy claiming I'd made everything up out of jealousy and mental illness. They were planning to use my therapy records against me and bring up the passport thing from Italy as proof I was vindictive and unstable. The prosecutor warned me they'd try to paint me as the real problem, and Jessica as the victim of a jealous sister's lies. Trial was happening whether I wanted it or not. Week 22 meant trial prep, and I spent hours in the prosecutor's office going over my testimony and reviewing all the evidence we'd collected. She had me practice staying calm while she asked me horrible questions the way Jessica's lawyer would. Jessica using dating apps to trick men into stalking her own family members feels like something out of a crime show. But here we are watching it actually happen to real people. She explained how they'd try to trigger me into looking crazy or angry because that would help their case. I practiced breathing exercises and keeping my voice steady, even when she brought up the most painful stuff. The night before trial, I couldn't eat dinner, and David held my hair back while I threw up from nerves. I sat at our kitchen table and wrote Jessica a letter I knew I'd never send telling her about all the normal sister stuff we could have had. Movie nights and inside jokes and being each other's bridesmaids instead of this nightmare we were living. David found me crying over that letter at 2 a.m. and held me while I sobbed about the relationship we'd never have. Day 154 arrived too fast, and suddenly I was sitting in a courtroom listening to opening statements. The prosecutor painted me as a victim of escalating harassment and threats, while Jessica's lawyer described me as a jealous sister who couldn't handle her siblings' success. Jessica sat at the defense table in a conservative dress I'd never seen her wear before, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue even though no tears were falling. Mom was there too, sitting right behind Jessica in the gallery, looking like she'd aged 10 years in the last few months. When my turn came, I testified for 3 straight hours going through every single incident from the passport to the fire to the fake profiles to the wedding disaster. Jessica's lawyer interrupted constantly asking about my mental health history and whether I was taking medication and bringing up the Italy trip over and over. My hands were shaking so bad, I had to clasp them in my lap, but I kept my voice level and answered every question without losing my temper. The jury watched me carefully, and I couldn't tell if they believed me or thought I was some crazy person making stuff up. The second day of trial brought Nathan to the stand, and he testified about finding Jessica at our apartment and the weird things she'd said about teaching me a lesson. Then the other wedding guests testified about the recording and the scene Jessica caused. And finally, the detective presented all the evidence from the electronic devices and the background check reports. Jessica's lawyer kept suggesting everyone was lying or exaggerating or misremembering things, but the detective had documentation for everything. When the prosecution rested, Jessica's lawyer stood up and announced they'd be proving I orchestrated everything to frame my innocent sister. The next day, Jessica took the stand wearing this soft pink dress that made her look younger, and she kept dabbing at her eyes with tissues even though they were completely dry. She started telling the jury how I'd always been jealous of her success and popularity, and how the passport thing was just a misunderstanding that I blew out of proportion. She admitted to maybe sending a few texts when she was upset about missing her trip, but insisted she never meant any harm and definitely never hired anyone or broke into anything. Her voice cracked perfectly when she talked about Cancun, and she actually managed to squeeze out real tears saying I'd ruined her life over petty sibling rivalry. The jury was watching her closely, and some of them looked sympathetic, which made my stomach drop. But then the prosecutor stood up for cross-examination, and everything changed. She pulled up Jessica's Instagram posts from the exact time she claimed to be homesick or visiting friends, and they showed her at completely different locations. She showed texts Jessica sent to her friends bragging about teaching me a lesson, and screenshots of her searching for private investigators weeks before she claimed this all started. Jessica's face went from pink to white to red as each piece of evidence appeared on the screen. The prosecutor asked her to explain the timeline discrepancies, and Jessica started stumbling over her words and contradicting herself. Then the prosecutor showed a deleted post Jessica made saying karma's coming with my address in the background, and Jessica snapped she deserved it before her lawyer objected loudly. The jury definitely noticed that outburst and started taking more notes. During closing arguments, the prosecutor laid out the clear pattern of escalation from the passport to the harassment to the stalking to the physical threats, and showed how Jessica's own evidence proved she was lying. Jessica's lawyer argued this was just family dysfunction that got out of hand, and there was reasonable doubt about the more serious charges. The jury went into deliberation, and I waited in the hallway with David and Sophia and Nathan and my dad, who'd finally shown up for support. 6 hours felt like 6 days, but finally the bailiff called us back in. The jury foreman stood up and read guilty on felony stalking and guilty on criminal harassment, and I felt nothing at first, just empty. Jessica didn't react at all, but Mom started sobbing loudly. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks, and when Jessica's lawyer asked for her to remain free until then, the judge looked at all the evidence of escalation and flight risk and ordered her into custody immediately. 2 officers cuffed Jessica right there in the courtroom, and as they led her past me, she turned her head away. 2 weeks later at sentencing, the judge gave her 3 years with possibility of parole in 18 months, plus mandatory therapy and a permanent restraining order. She also had to pay for all my therapy costs and moving expenses, which her lawyer protested, but the judge held firm. As the officers led her away this time, she mouthed something at me that looked like this isn't over, but I couldn't be sure and honestly didn't care anymore. A few weeks after that, Dad asked me to meet him for coffee and told me he was filing for divorce from Mom. He apologized for not protecting me better and for choosing to believe Jessica's lies for so long, and said he'd started seeing a therapist himself to understand why he'd failed as a parent. We agreed to try rebuilding our relationship slowly without Jessica's shadow between us. I went back to my own therapy, but now we focused on healing instead of just surviving each crisis. My therapist noticed I was sleeping better and had gained back some weight and wasn't jumping at every noise anymore. The hypervigilance was fading bit by bit. Then I got a letter from Mom saying she was moving to Florida to live with her sister because she needed distance from everything that happened. She wrote, "I hope someday you can forgive me for choosing wrong," which felt like the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from her. I kept the letter in a drawer but never responded. David and I finally felt stable enough to have people over, so we hosted a small dinner party with Sophia and Nathan and 2 couples from David's work. There was actual laughter and normal conversation about movies and vacation plans, and nobody treated me like a victim or asked about the trial. The apartment felt like home for the first time, not just a hiding place. I'd started a new job a month earlier at a marketing firm where nobody knew my history, and I was preparing for my first big client presentation. My phone buzzed with an automated alert from the victim notification system saying Jessica had been denied early release for refusing to participate in mandatory therapy. I deleted the notification immediately and took a deep breath and walked into the conference room where my colleagues were waiting. They saw me as talented and capable and creative, not as someone's victim or target. I presented my campaign ideas confidently and got approved for the full project and realized I was finally free. Well, folks, that's our time together all wrapped up with a bow. Thanks for letting me share my thoughts while you enjoyed this. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.